The silver ship moved through the darkness of space like a hunting animal. Inside the ship, Commander Velek looked at the blue and green worlds spinning below them. Earth looked peaceful from this distance.
Oh.
The white clouds moved slowly across the surface, and the large bodies of water sparkled in the light of the yellow star. Velek had been collecting creatures from new worlds. For over 200 years, his ship, the Eternal Tide, was filled with the most amazing animals from across the galaxy. Each creature lived in a special room that copied their home world. The people of his planet, the Zephyrians, loved to study these creatures and watch them in their floating city museums. This new world called Earth was different from the others. The creatures here were strong and dangerous. The large animals with sharp teeth could kill with one bite. The small flying creatures moved in huge groups that could block out the sun. Even the plants on this world could poison or trap anything that came too close. But it was the two-legged creatures that interested Velek the most. They called themselves humans. These humans were not the biggest or strongest animals on their world, but somehow they ruled over all the others. They had covered their planet with huge stone structures and filled the sky with flying machines. The humans looked weak. They had soft skin with no fur or scales to protect them. They had small teeth that could not tear through tough meat. Their claws were tiny and useless. Yet somehow, these soft creatures had become the most dangerous thing on their entire world. Velek's science officer, Dr. Thymel, had been studying the humans for months. "They are very strange," she told Velek. "They seem weak, but our scans show they can survive almost anything. They can live in hot places and cold places. They can go without food for many days. They can run for hours without stopping. Most amazing of all, they never give up fighting, even when they are hurt." Dr. Thymel pointed to her glowing screen. "Look at this. We found records of their wars. When these humans fight, they do not stop until they win or die. They have fought each other for thousands of years, and each war makes them better at fighting. They create new weapons and new ways to hurt their enemies. They are learning machines that think about nothing but how to survive and win." Thought about this information. Zephyrians were a peaceful people. They had not fought a war in over 1,000 years. They used their advanced technology to take what they wanted from less advanced worlds. No one had ever been able to stop them because no one had technology as good as theirs. But these humans worried him. Even though they were much less advanced, something about them felt dangerous. Their eyes were cold and calculating. They looked at everything like they were planning how to kill it. Even when they were being kind to their own kind, there was something frightening about the way they moved and thought. That is when Ulak made the decision that would destroy his entire civilization. He would not take adult humans. Adults were clearly too dangerous. Instead, he would take their young ones. All creatures were gentle and harmless when they were babies. Young animals could not fight back or cause trouble. It would be perfect for the collection. "We will take their children," Velek announced to his crew. "The young ones will be safe to handle and easy to control. We can study them and learn about their species without risk." Dr. Thymel looked worried. "Commander, are you sure this is wise? We know very little about how these creatures raise their young. What if... ... What if what?" Velek cut her off. "They are children. How dangerous could children possibly be?" The taking began on a clear morning in the Earth's month called October. The Zephyrian ships were invisible to human technology. They could move through the sky without being seen or heard. The plan was simple. Find human children who were alone, take them quickly, and leave before any adults noticed. In the state called Montana, 12-year-old Jake Morrison was walking on the dirt road that led to his school. The morning air was cold, and he could see his breath like small clouds. He was thinking about the math test he had that day when a shadow passed over him. Jake looked up and saw something impossible. A huge silver disc was floating in the air. Above him, it made no sound at all. Before he could run or shout, a blue light shot down from the ship and surrounded him. He felt his body become very light, and then everything went dark. The same thing happened all over the world. In Ohio, 10-year-old Lucy Bennett was playing in her backyard when the blue light took her. In New Mexico, 14-year-old Carlos Rivera was helping his father set up their camping tent when he suddenly vanished. The light took children from playgrounds and schoolyards, from farms and city streets. The Zephyrians were very good at what they did. Just 2 hours, they had taken 47 human children from 6 different continents. Children were between 8 and 16 years old. They were all healthy and strong. They came from different backgrounds and cultures, but they all had one thing in common. They were all human. As the Zephyrian ships carried the unconscious children up into space, the aliens felt proud of their successful mission. They had collected perfect samples of the dominant species from the dangerous world called Earth. Soon, these young humans would wake up in the safety of the biodome, where they could be studied and admired by Zephyrian scientists and citizens. But the Zephyrians had made a terrible mistake. They thought human children were like the young of other species, weak, helpless creatures that needed adults to protect them and tell them what to do. They believed that without their parents, these human children would be lost and afraid. They had no idea that human children were nothing like other young creatures in the galaxy. Human children were already learning to hunt and fight from the time they could walk. They played games that taught them strategy and violence. They went to schools where they learned not just facts, but how to solve problems and work together. Even more important, human children carried something in their blood that no other species possessed. They were the children of Earth, the most dangerous world in the galaxy. Every human child was born with the genetic memory of 1,000,000 years of surviving on a planet that tried to kill everything that lived on it. The human children who were sleeping in the Zephyrian ships were not helpless babies. They were young predators. They were the sons and daughters of the species that had fought its way to the top of the most brutal world known to exist. They had been raised by parents who had learned that the only way to keep your children safe was to make them strong. Jake Morrison's father had taught him how to track animals through the forest. Lucy Bennett's mother had shown her how to take apart and rebuild every machine in their house. Carlos Rivera had been learning how to fight since he was old enough to stand. Every single child on those ships had been trained by their parents to survive anything. As the eternal tide moved away from Earth and toward the Zephyrian homeworlds, Commander Velek looked at his sleeping prisoners and smiled. He had no idea that he had just kidnapped 47 of the most dangerous young creatures in the galaxy. He thought he had captured helpless children. Instead, he had just given humanity's next generation of leaders a reason to show the galaxy what humans could do when someone threatened their family. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the stars for thousands of years, but their time was about to end. The children were starting to wake up. Jake Morrison woke up with a terrible headache. The first thing he noticed was that everything around him was glowing with a soft blue light. The second thing he noticed was that he was not on Earth anymore. He was lying on a smooth floor inside what looked like a giant bubble made of clear material. Outside the bubble, he could see a huge room filled with other bubbles. Each bubble contained different creatures from different worlds. Some of the creatures looked like giant insects. Others looked like walking plants. Few looked like nothing Jake had ever seen before. Jake sat up slowly and looked around his prison. The bubble was about 20 feet wide and 15 feet tall. The air inside smelled clean but strange. There was no door that he could see. The walls of the bubble seemed solid, but they glowed when he touched them. In the bubble next to his, Jake saw a small girl with blonde hair. She was also awake and looking around with wide eyes. Jake waved at her, and she waved back. He could see her mouth moving, but he could not hear any sound through the walls of their prisons. More children were waking up in bubbles all around the huge room. Jake counted them as they sat up and looked around. 47 total, all human. Children, all looking scared and confused, but none of them were crying or screaming. Even the youngest ones were staying calm and trying to figure out what was happening. That was the first sign that the aliens had made a big mistake. Normal. Children from most species would have been terrified. They would have been crying for their parents and trying to hide. But human children were different. Even when they were scared, they started thinking about how to solve their problems. Lucy Bennett was 10 years old, but she was already smarter than most adults. Her parents were both scientists, and they had taught her to observe everything and ask questions about how things worked. As soon as she woke up, she started studying her prison. The walls were not solid like glass. They were made of some kind of energy that could be shaped like a solid material. Lucy could see tiny machines floating in the air outside the bubbles. The machines were watching the prisoners and recording everything they did. The floor under her feet was warm and soft, like it was designed to keep her comfortable. Lucy realized that this was not just a prison. It was a zoo. The aliens were keeping them like animals in a zoo, so they could watch them and study them. The thought made her angry, but she did not let her anger control her. Instead, she used it to make her think more clearly. Carlos Rivera was the oldest of the captured children at 14 years old. He had been on his school wrestling team and had learned how to stay calm under pressure. Carlos was also the son of a military man, and his father had taught him to always look for weaknesses in any enemy. Carlos started testing the walls of his bubble, pushed against them with his hands and shoulders. He tried to find any weak spots or places where the energy wall might be thinner. The walls felt solid, but Carlos noticed something interesting. When he pushed hard against one spot, the wall would get brighter for a moment, like it was using more power to keep him inside. That meant the walls were not perfect. They had to work to contain him. If they had to work, that meant they could get tired or run out of power. 9-year-old Amy Foster had a special gift. She could remember everything she saw with perfect detail. Her teachers called it a photographic memory. As Amy looked around the huge room, she was memorizing every detail. She counted the number of bubbles, the positions of the floating machines, and the patterns of light on the walls. Amy also started watching the aliens who came to check on the prisoners. The aliens were tall and thin with long arms and legs. Their skin was pale blue, and their eyes were very large. They moved slowly and carefully, like they were afraid of getting hurt. When they looked at the human children, Amy could see fear. In their big eyes, the aliens were scared of them. That was very important information. 13-year-old Ryan Cole had grown up on his family's farm in Kansas. He knew how machines worked and how to fix them when they broke. Ryan started studying the floating machines that were watching them. He could see that they were connected to the bigger systems that ran the prison. Ryan noticed that the machines moved in patterns. They would fly to one bubble, record the creature inside for exactly 2 minutes, then move to the next bubble. They did this over and over, like they were following a program. It meant they were not very smart. They were just following orders. If the machines were not smart, then maybe Ryan could find a way to confuse them or make them malfunction. 11-year-old Sophie. Blake had been taking karate lessons since she was 5 years old. Her instructor had taught her that the most important thing in any fight was to understand your enemy. Sophie started watching the aliens very carefully. The aliens moved like they had never had to fight for anything in their lives. They were slow and clumsy. When one of them accidentally bumped into a floating machine, it jumped back like it had been hurt. Even though the machine was very small and light, Sophie realized that these aliens had probably never faced any real danger in their entire lives. They lived in a safe, comfortable world where nothing ever threatened them. It made them weak. They would not know how to fight if someone attacked them. The children could not talk to each other through the walls of their prisons, but they found other ways to communicate. Jake started using hand signals that he had learned from watching war movies with his father. Lucy used math symbols drawn in the air. Carlos used the simple sign language that his wrestling coach had taught the team. Slowly, the children began to share information with each other. They learned each other's names and ages. They figured out where each of them had been taken from on Earth. Most importantly, they started working together to understand their situation. 8-year-old Tim Brooks was the youngest of the captured children. But he was not helpless. His mother was a doctor who worked with people who had mental problems. And Tim had learned a lot about how people's minds worked. Tim could see that some of the other captured creatures in the zoo were very sad and had given up hope. But the human children were different. Even after being kidnapped and put in prison, they were not giving up. They were getting angry, and they were starting to plan. Tim could see it in their eyes and the way they moved. They were not going to accept being prisoners. Dr. Thymel was the head scientist studying the new prisoners. She had been excited to observe the young humans, but now she was starting to worry. The human children were not behaving like normal young creatures. Most species, when they're young, were separated from adults, would become frightened and helpless. They would wait for adults to rescue them, or just give up and accept their fate. But these human children were doing something else. Entirely, they were studying their captors. They were testing their prison. They were communicating with each other and working together. Dr. Thymel had never seen anything like it in 200 years of collecting specimens. "Commander Velek," she said into her communication device, "I think we may have a problem with the new specimens." "What kind of problem?" came Velek's reply. "They are not acting like children," Dr. Thymel said. "They are acting like ... like soldiers." But it was too late for the Zephyrians to understand what they had done. They had taken 47 human children from their families. They had made them angry. And now those children were working together to find a way to escape. The aliens thought they had captured helpless young animals. Instead, they had kidnapped 47 young humans who carried the genetic memory of 1,000,000 years of survival on the most dangerous world in the galaxy. The children were no longer scared. Now they were planning. 3 weeks had passed since the children were taken from Earth. In that time, something amazing had happened inside the alien prison. The human children had turned their zoo cage into something the aliens had never seen before. They had created a secret army. Jake Morrison had become the leader of all the children without anyone voting or choosing him. It just happened naturally because he was good at making decisions, and the other children trusted him. Jake had organized everyone into different groups, based on what they were good at doing. Lucy, Bonet, and Ryan Cole were in charge of the tech group. Their job was to figure out how all the alien machines worked. Lucy had discovered something very important about the walls of their prison. The energy walls were controlled by the emotions and thoughts of the creatures inside them. When a prisoner was scared or sad, the walls became stronger and harder to break. But when a prisoner was calm and focused, the walls became weaker. Lucy had learned this by watching how the walls changed when different creatures felt different emotions. Even more amazing, Lucy found out that humans could control the walls in ways that other creatures could not. Human brains work differently than the brains of other species. Humans could focus their thoughts like a laser beam. This focus could actually change how the energy walls behaved. Ryan had been studying the floating machines that watched them. He discovered that the machines were connected to each other through invisible energy beams. If one machine broke or stopped working, the others would come to fix it. But Ryan figured out that if enough machines broke at the same time, the system would get confused and stop working properly. Amy Foster was the leader of the intelligence group. Her perfect memory had recorded every detail about the alien ship and how it worked. Amy had counted exactly how many aliens were on the ship. She knew what time they changed shifts. She knew which aliens were important and which ones were just workers. Amy had also made maps of the entire ship by watching the aliens move through the corridors outside their prison. She knew where the control room was, where the aliens slept, and where they kept their weapons. Most importantly, she knew where the communication systems were located. The aliens had made a big mistake by putting all the human children in the same room. They could see each other and learn from watching each other. Amy had been teaching the other children her memory techniques, so now many of them could also remember important details perfectly. Carlos Rivera was in charge of the physical group. His job was to prepare the children for fighting and escaping. Carlos had been teaching the other children how to move quietly, how to fight without weapons, and how to work together as a team. Carlos had also been studying the other prisoners in the zoo. There were creatures from dozens of different worlds, and most of them had been prisoners for years, or even decades. Carlos tried to communicate with them using simple gestures and drawings. What Carlos learned made him very angry. The aliens had been stealing creatures from other worlds for hundreds of years. They had taken children from many different species. Those children had grown up as prisoners, never seeing their home worlds again. But Carlos also learned something hopeful. Many of the other prisoners still remembered their home worlds and wanted to go back. Had not forgotten how to fight, they had just given up hope. Carlos realized that if the humans could escape, they might be able to help all the other prisoners escape too. Sophie Blake was teaching the combat group. Even though the children could not practice fighting inside their energy bubbles, Sophie had found ways to help them prepare. She taught them exercises they could do to make their muscles stronger. She showed them how to turn everyday objects into weapons. Sophie had been watching the aliens very carefully, and she had discovered their biggest weaknesses. The aliens had never learned how to fight because nothing on their world had ever threatened them. They were like sheep who had never seen a wolf. When the aliens looked at the human children, Sophie could see that they were becoming more and more nervous. The aliens knew something was wrong, but they did not understand what it was. They could feel that the humans were dangerous, but they did not know how to protect themselves. Tim Brooks, even though he was only 8 years old, had become the group's expert on alien psychology. Tim watched how the aliens behaved and figured out what they were thinking and feeling. Tim discovered that the aliens were very proud and thought they were better than all other creatures. This pride was making them blind to the danger they were. And the aliens could not believe that primitive creatures from a backward world could be smarter or more dangerous than they were. Their pride was going to be their downfall. Tim also noticed that the aliens were starting to argue with each other. Some of them wanted to send the human children back to Earth because they were causing too much trouble. Others wanted to keep studying them. Disagreement was making the aliens sloppy and careless. The children had also learned to communicate with each other without the aliens knowing. They had created a complex system of hand signals, facial expressions, and body movements that looked like normal behavior to the aliens, but actually carried detailed messages. Jake could tell Lucy to start working on weakening the walls just by scratching his nose in a certain way. Carlos could warn everyone that aliens were coming by, stretching his arms over his head. Sophie could give fighting instructions by doing what looked like simple exercises. The aliens thought they were watching normal child behavior, but they were actually watching a military unit preparing for battle. Dr. Thymel had become very worried about the human prisoners. She had been studying them for 3 weeks, and nothing about their behavior made sense. Young creatures were supposed to become sad and accepting after being separated from their parents for a long time. But the human children seemed to be getting stronger and more organized every day. Dr. Thymel had tried to tell Commander Velik about her concerns, but he would not listen. Velik was too proud to admit that he might have made a mistake. He kept saying that they were just children and could not possibly be a threat to advanced aliens like the Zephyrians. But Dr. Thymel had access to all the monitoring equipment, and she could see things that Velik could not. The energy readings from the human prison bubbles were changing in ways that should have been impossible. The floating surveillance machines were starting to malfunction more often. Most frightening of all, the other prisoners throughout the zoo were becoming more active and alert. It was like the presence of the human children was waking up creatures that had been asleep for years. The humans were somehow inspiring hope in prisoners who had forgotten what hope felt like. Dr. Thymel made a decision that would save her life. She quietly began preparing an escape pod and gathering supplies. She did not know what the human children were planning, but she knew it was going to be bad for the Zephyrians. On the 21st day of their imprisonment, Jake Morrison called a final silent meeting. Using their secret communication system, he spoke to all 47 children at once. Without making a sound, the plan was ready. Lucy and Ryan had figured out how to shut down the prison walls and surveillance systems. Amy had mapped out their route to the ship's control center. Carlos had identified which aliens they needed to capture and which ones they needed to avoid. Sophie had prepared the children for the fighting that would come. Most importantly, they had all agreed on their main goal. We're not just going to escape. We're going to take control of the entire ship, free all the other prisoners, and send a message to Earth that would warn humanity about the alien threat. Jake looked around at the other children. 3 weeks ago, they had been ordinary kids going to school and playing with their friends. Now they were something else entirely. Had become what they needed to become to survive. The aliens had kidnapped them thinking they were helpless. Children. Tonight they would learn what human children could do when someone threatened their family and their freedom. The escape would begin at midnight. The ship's lights dimmed to signal the beginning of the alien night cycle. Throughout the biodome, most of the captured creatures settled down to sleep. The floating surveillance machines reduced their patrol patterns, and the alien guards began their shift change. Everything was exactly as Amy Foster had predicted it would be. At exactly midnight ship time, 47 human children acted as one. Lucy. Bennett closed her eyes and focused her mind like her scientist parents had taught her. She imagined the energy walls around her becoming weaker and weaker. The blue glow of her prison bubble began to flicker. Ryan Cole did the same thing in his bubble, and then Carlos Rivera, and then Sophie Blake, one by one. The prison walls containing the human children started to fail. The aliens had designed these walls to contain creatures who would panic or give up when they were scared. They had never imagined prisoners who could work together to break out using the power of their own minds. Within 5 minutes, all 47 children were free from their bubbles. They moved like ghosts through the biodome, their bare feet, making no sound on the smooth floor. Sophie Blake had taught them well. They knew how to move without being seen or heard. The first alien guard never knew what hit him. He was a young Zephyrian named Keyless who was checking on the night shift systems when a small human boy appeared behind him. Tim Brooks, the 8-year-old, tapped the alien on the shoulder. When Keyless turned around, surprised Carlos Rivera, struck him with a sleeping hold that Sophie had taught him. The alien fell unconscious without making a sound. The children quickly took his communication device and security cards. Amy Foster had memorized which cards would open which doors throughout the ship. The children split into their planned groups and moved through the ship like a coordinated military force. The tech group, led by Lucy and Ryan, headed for the main computer systems. The intelligence group, led by Amy, went to secure the communication center. The combat group, led by Sophie and Carlos, moved to take control of the ship's bridge. What happened next was something the Zephyrians had never experienced in their entire history as a spacefaring species. They had conquered dozens of worlds and captured thousands of creatures. But they had never faced an enemy that fought back with intelligence, courage, teamwork. The human children moved through the ship like they owned it. They had studied every corridor, every room, and every system for 3 weeks. They knew the ship better than some of the aliens who worked on it. Lucy Bennett and Ryan Cole reached the main computer room without being detected. The door was protected by an electronic lock that would have stopped any normal prisoner. But Lucy had been watching the aliens enter their access codes for weeks. Her perfect memory had recorded every number and symbol. The computer room contained the brain of the entire ship. Every system, every function, every life support mechanism was controlled from this room. Ryan looked at the alien technology with excitement. It was far more advanced than anything on Earth, but the basic principles were the same as the farm equipment he had grown up fixing. Lucy began typing commands into the alien computer system. She had learned their language by watching them work and listening to their conversations. The Zephyrians thought their language was too complicated for primitive creatures to understand. But they were wrong. Within minutes, Lucy had taken control of the ship's internal security systems. She shut down the alarm systems that would have warned the aliens that prisoners had escaped. She turned off the automated defenses that would have tried to stop intruders. Most importantly, she began opening the prison cells that held creatures. From other worlds, Amy Foster and her intelligence group had reached the communication center without any trouble. The aliens had never imagined that prisoners could escape their cells, so they had not bothered to guard the important areas of the ship very well. Amy began working on the communication systems with the same calm focus that had made her the best. A student in her school back on Earth, she needed to do 2 things. First, she had to prevent the aliens from calling for help from other Zephyrian ships. Second, she had to send a message to Earth, warning them about the alien threat. The communication equipment was incredibly complex. But Amy had been watching the aliens use it for weeks. She had memorized every procedure and every control. Small hands moved across the alien controls with surprising skill. Meanwhile, Sophie Blake and Carlos Rivera were leading the combat group toward the ship's bridge. This was the most dangerous part of the plan because the bridge would have the most guards and the most important aliens. Sophie had taught the children to move like a pack of wolves. They stayed low, used the shadows for cover, and communicated. With silent hand signals, when they encountered alien crew members, they struck fast and quietly, using the martial arts techniques Sophie had learned and modified for fighting in the low gravity of the spaceship. The aliens they fought had no chance. The Zephyrians had lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten how to defend themselves. They were tall and graceful, but they were also weak and slow. The human children were small and quick, and they fought with a ferocity that terrified their captors. Commander Velik was in his private quarters when the ship's emergency systems finally activated. By then, it was far too late. The human children had taken control of almost every important system on the ship. Velik rushed to the bridge, expecting to find his crew working to contain a minor prisoner uprising. Instead, he found something that shattered his understanding of the universe. The bridge was full of human children who looked at him with cold, calculating eyes. Jake Morrison, 12 years old but somehow projecting the authority of a seasoned military commander, stood in the center of the bridge. Around him, other human children were operating the ship's controls with confidence and skill. It was impossible, but it was happening. Commander Velik, Jake said calmly, speaking the Zephyrian language with perfect pronunciation. You made a very big mistake when you took us from our families. Velik stared at the boy in shock. How had a primitive child learned their language? How had these weak creatures escaped from the most advanced prison system in the galaxy? How were they operating technology that should have been far beyond their understanding? Carlos Rivera stepped forward, and Velik could see something in the 14-year-old's eyes that made him afraid. It was the look of a predator that had cornered its prey. You thought we were just helpless children, Carlos said. But human children are not like the young of other species. We are the sons and daughters of the most dangerous world in the galaxy. You gave us a reason to show you what that means. Throughout the ship, other human children were freeing the alien prisoners from dozens of different worlds. Creatures who had been captives for years or decades were suddenly free for the first time since they were taken from their home planets. Lucy. Bennett had sent a signal toward Earth that contained everything the children had learned about the Zephyrian Empire. The message included detailed information about their technology, their military strength, and the locations of their main worlds. When that signal reached Earth, humanity would be ready for anything the aliens might try. But the children were not finished. They had freed themselves and warned their home world, but they had also discovered something that changed everything. The Zephyrian Empire was built on slavery and cruelty. For hundreds of years, they had been stealing creatures from other worlds and treating them like animals in a zoo, Jake. Morrison looked at Commander Velik and made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. Your empire ends today, he said. We are going to make sure that no other children ever suffer what you put us through. The storm had begun. 6 months had passed since 47 human children disappeared from Earth. In that time, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have imagined. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, which had ruled the stars for thousands of years, was falling. Apart like a house made of cards, the ship that had once been called the Eternal Tide now had a new name painted on its hull in dozens of different languages. It was called Freedom's Hope, and it had become the most feared vessel in known space. Not because it carried terrible weapons, but because it carried something far more dangerous. It carried hope. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the ship, looking out at the stars through the large viewing window. He was now 13 years old, but the experiences of the past 6 months had changed him into something more than just a teenager. He had become the leader of a revolution that was spreading across the entire galaxy. The bridge around him was busy with activity. But it was not the frantic chaos of a battle. It was the organized efficiency of a team that had learned to work together perfectly. Human children and freed aliens from dozens of different worlds operated the ship's controls together, each contributing their unique skills and knowledge. Lucy. Bennett had become the ship's chief engineer and technology expert. She had not only mastered Zephyrian technology, but she had improved it in ways that amazed even herself. The ship now ran better and faster than it ever had under alien control. Lucy had also designed new communication systems that allowed the freed prisoners to contact their homeworlds and spread the word about the rebellion. Carlos Rivera. had grown into his role as the ship's diplomat and military commander. He had learned to speak the languages of dozens of different species, and he had a natural gift for bringing together creatures who had been enemies for centuries. Under his leadership, former slaves had learned to work together and fight for their freedom. Sophie Blake commanded a fleet of smaller ships that the rebels had captured from the Zephyrians. Her combat training had evolved into something that terrified the alien military commanders. She had taken the martial arts she learned on Earth and combined them with fighting techniques from a dozen different worlds. The result was a style of warfare that no one in the galaxy knew how to defend against. Amy Foster had become the rebellion's intelligence chief. Her perfect memory now contained detailed information about every Zephyrian military base, every slave world, and every weakness in the Empire's defenses. She coordinated rescue missions that freed thousands of prisoners and gathered information that helped the rebellion stay one step ahead of their enemies. Ryan Cole had turned his mechanical skills into something that made him invaluable to the rebellion. He could repair and improve technology from any world, and he had taught these skills to others. The rebel fleet was now better maintained, more advanced than many official military forces. Even little Tim Brooks had found his place. In the New Order, his understanding of psychology had helped former slaves overcome their fear and despair. He had also become an expert at predicting how different alien species would react to the rebellion, which helped the leaders plan their strategies. Message that Amy had sent to Earth 6 months ago had reached its destination and changed everything. Humanity's response had been swift and devastating, but not in the way anyone expected. Earth did not send a military fleet to rescue the children. Instead, they sent something much more powerful. They sent more humans. Volunteer ships began arriving from Earth within 3 months of receiving the children's message. But these were not military vessels. They were teachers, doctors, engineers, and ordinary families who had come to help with the rebellion. The humans brought with them the one thing that the galaxy had been missing for thousands of years. Brought the idea that freedom was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Dr. Thymel, the Zephyrian scientist who had escaped the ship when the children took control, had become an important ally to the rebellion. She provided crucial information about Zephyrian technology and military tactics. She had also become one of the first aliens to truly understand what made humans so dangerous. They do not fight for conquest or glory, she explained to other alien leaders who wanted to understand the rebellion. They fight for an idea, the idea that no creature should be enslaved by another. This idea is more powerful than any weapon because it makes them willing to sacrifice everything to protect others. Commander Velik had become a prisoner on his own former ship, but Jake Morrison treated him with more kindness than Velik had ever shown to his captives. Jake visited the alien commander regularly, trying to help him understand what his empire had done wrong. "You could have been our friends," Jake told Velik during one of their conversations. "Humans love to learn about other species and other worlds. If you had come to Earth and asked to be our allies, we would have welcomed you. But instead, you chose to steal our children and treat us like animals. That was your mistake." Velik looked at the boy who had destroyed his civilization and felt something he had never experienced before. He felt shame. For the first time in his long life, he understood that his people had been wrong. They had caused suffering to thousands of innocent creatures, and they had convinced themselves that it was acceptable because they were more advanced. "What will happen to my people?" Velik asked quietly.
"That depends on them,"
Jake replied. "If they stop enslaving others and start helping to free the creatures they have captured, then maybe we can find a way to live in peace. But if they continue to fight against freedom, then they will lose everything." The rebellion had grown far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Worlds that had been enslaved for centuries were declaring their independence. Species that had forgotten how to fight were remembering their strength. The Zephyrian Empire was collapsing not because of military defeat, but because the idea of freedom was spreading faster than they could stop it. On Earth, the children's families had waited and hoped for 6 months. They had watched the news, reports about the rebellion spreading across the galaxy, and they had been proud of their sons and daughters. But they had also worried and missed them every single day. When the first ships from the rebellion finally arrived at Earth, Not just the original 47 children, but hundreds of other freed prisoners. The reunions were emotional beyond words. Parents hugged children who had grown up too fast and seen too much. But they also saw something wonderful in their children's eyes. They saw strength, confidence, and a sense of purpose that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Jake. Morrison stood with his parents on the observation deck of Freedom's Hope. Looking down at the blue and green world where he had been born, Earth looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago, but everything else had changed. "Are you going to stay home now?" his mother asked, holding him tight. Jake looked out at the stars and thought about all the worlds where creatures were still enslaved, still waiting for someone to bring them hope. He thought about the responsibility that came with being the first generation of humans to travel among the stars. "I'll visit often," he said, "but my home is bigger now. It includes all the worlds where beings want to be free. We've started something out there, and we need to finish it." His father smiled with pride and sadness. "Just remember that no matter how far you travel or how important you become, you'll always be our son." Jake hugged his parents and made them a promise. "I'll remember. I'll make sure that no other children ever have to go through what we went through. The galaxy is going to be a better place because we're going to make it better." The aliens had kidnapped what they thought were helpless children. Instead, they had created the leaders of a new age of freedom among the stars. The Zephyrian Empire was finished, but something better was taking its place. A galaxy where strength was used to protect the weak, and where no creature would ever be enslaved again. The children had come home, but their real adventure was just beginning.